let's start. It's quite significant, isn't it? The governor of the Bank of England, very senior person when it comes to talking about the economy, let's face it, and he's chosen quite a moment to say that although he's been very clear, as a public official, I take no position on Brexit per se, but I do have to point out that the relationship has changed and the EU has weighed on the economy. I mean, it's something...
Brexit has weighed on the economy rather than the EU.
Well, yeah, Brexit, but also, I suppose, in a way, it is the EU, isn't it? Saying that, the fact of not being in the EU and,
exactly.
the issue of the EU.
Yeah.
I mean, this is quite significant for him to come out and say that. It's probably not, it's not new news to lots of people, but him to clearly choose yesterday at a time to say that when Rachel Reid is making her comments is quite significant, isn't it, Selma?
I do think it's significant. I think it's significant for a very particular reason, which is I don't think public officials would have done that previously under previous governments because of the sort of Brexit drive. It would be interesting to see how Brexiteer MPs and the Reform MPs come out in reaction to this, because it was always the fear of those people that actually the establishment, which Andrew Bailey as the governor represents, was always against Brexit, and this is somehow going to be a reversal of those fortunes. Now, the reality is that times have changed. We are looking at very poor growth, and is that because of the trading relationship with our closest and largest trading partner has been diminished as a result of putting up barriers? And does that mean we have to look again at perhaps not rejoining or creating any of those relationships as we had before, but certainly thinking about how we could do it better in order to stop the stagnation?
Caroline, I suppose Brexiteers will probably say that, in a way, we're in a stronger position. This will be their argument that we can choose to make a deal with Europe if we can, or also we've got the option to try and do a free trade deal if we can with the US at the moment as Trump comes in. So they'll be thinking that we've got options.
Well, you can choose to make a deal. Whether the other side want to make that deal, that's another question. Whether that's the European Union or whether it's America for that. There's two sides to a negotiation. I think in some ways it's not really surprising that Governor Bankering said this. He may think that a change of government, a little bit more leeway, but in some ways it's sort of warm words, but what does it really mean? There's no sign that the Labour government is at all planning to go anywhere near a customs union or a single market again. Keir Starmer's been really clear about that. So what does better relationships actually mean? Just being able to get around a table and have a talk without having an argument is a start. But it's warm words, but I'm not sure what it means.
But the actuals, I think the thing that was surprising is to me was, yes, of course, better relations. You might imagine that that would be quite a loose thing. But to actually say that leaving the EU has weighed on the economy feels like a strong thing to say at exactly the moment when Rachel Reid is making that. The Mansion House speech we talk about, but for those that don't know, it's an annual speech, isn't it? Which is but by the Chancellor, and it's usually seen as sort of laying out plans for the future.
Yeah,
so
we all
it
know.
Feels like a slightly torpedo moment.
Maybe, but I mean, it's a Mansion House speech. They've got to think of something to say, in these things. But, the other side of it is that, when we were in the EU, some of the problems that the Labour government's trying to deal with on growth was still there then. And actually, what happened after the financial crash, it exposed how weak our economy was.
Can I say, is Keir Starmer naive to say that, look, we're never going to go back into the single market, we're never going to get into the customs? Can he really say that? I mean, there are signs already...
Depends how long he thinks he's going to be Prime Minister, I suppose.
But there are signs emerging. You've got the Bank of England now saying it. We're not seeing any positive consequence of Brexit. It's possible. I mean, it might be a really difficult challenge, but it's still possible that it could happen again.
Well, this is what's called in Westminster the pitch roll, I think. So actually, Kate, you've got a very good point there, which is why did the governor say it now? Why did he choose this moment? I'm not sure it's the torpedo. I think it's kind of laying down the groundwork to test the water and see where people are. And look, I voted Remain.
As did I.
But I also recognise, as you do probably, that there were problems with the EU structure as was. Was it enough to sort of leave, or should we have taken better care of reforming? With that aside, there is going to be this question about what we do about that relationship, because a US trade deal is not forthcoming. I worked on a trade policy and a TTIP deal, which was called then, with the US, and You know what? The Americans are pretty tough negotiators.
And now Donald Trump's going to be adding
Trump is putting some very reasonable people in his team. I mean, come on. You know.
No comment.
Just sticking with the economy.
You worked with some of them, did you?
Rachel Reeves. I mean, it's kind of slightly overshadowed Rachel Reeves. It was meant to be her day yesterday, and
although it's pretty big,
for a slight change, to try and make a change and a sort of a reset for Rachel Reeves. And she's talking about an easing of banking regulations. You know, this is
the very ones that were put in when we had all the banking collapses, which a lot of people will say we're still feeling the pain of that. So the idea of loosening those restrictions, I mean, it kind of what led to, austerity for so many years, didn't it, that whole crisis so in 2008. So why now, and is that right?
It's certainly a change of tone, isn't it?
Yeah.
From what we had after that financial crash, where everybody was really concerned about maybe the regulations were too loose, and it was a bit like the Wild West in those trading rooms. In London, and not just in London, but around the world. So I think it's interesting tone about saying, well, maybe actually we need to sort of loosen some of that because down the road now they've become so tight, it's become restrictive. And I think that's it's going to be interesting what commentators say about this. But maybe there's also something about, following the budget, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, wanting to signal more that she's here for business as well and here for growth. And I think
what does this mean for people at home, sitting at home now, having their breakfast? I mean, like most of us, we don't know what goes on in the city. It's a world we're not even part of. When we hear about banking regulations and change in the city,
bonuses,
it goes over most people's heads. What does it really mean? What's the implications for people at home?
I think some of the problem was that most people in the city didn't realise what banking regulations meant, and that's why we're in a bit of a mess. So the simplest way I can put it is the Mansion House speech is about talking to all those people who work in the city in professional services.
Right.
So the kinds of people who find money to lend to businesses, the kind of people that advise on that, the kind of people who insure those things. So it's very much like big business services. I think if anybody watching has worked in a business, they'll sort of understand it, the sort of companies that are there. There is a big problem in the UK at the moment, is that we're not having enough money circulating to invest in things in the private sector. I think part of the reason the Chancellor's decided to loosen some of the regulations around this, or, even talk about bonuses, is to be able to attract wealth and attract the talent that attracts wealth into the country.
So essentially, with less regulation, they can in the city, they can start taking a few more risks, can't they?
They can take a few more risks, but
on
also
what they invest in and etc.
Exactly.
Would that be our pension funds and things?
Well, the pension funds, I think what she announced at Mansion House was about amalgamating.
That's a separate thing, but I'm just meaning generally, is that the sort of thing people might feel is closer to them, the idea, and the impact on other things? You're not.
So the local, one of the ideas that Rachel Reeves has got is around, all the local government pension funds and pulling them together in a super mega pension fund. I think the Canadians and Australians have something similar. Now, obviously,
but if they then take greater risk,
so pensions are protected in a different way.
They are. It's not like they're going to get a bonus early for doing stuff, but it's about the volume that you could put together, and therefore with that they can have, I suppose, bigger clout in terms of what they can invest in, and particularly in British projects and so forth, and infrastructure.
OK, all right.
We should say, by the way, the growth figures are due out at 7 o'clock this morning.
Expected to go down again.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not surprised about it. Caroline, are you surprised about that? Because this is what Rachel Reeves has based everything on, isn't it? Economic growth.
Yeah, it suggested it might go down. I think it was 0.5%, wasn't it, in the last quarter?
And now down to 0.2.
So it is a bit down, but at least it's not, going so far down it becomes negative. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. But again, I think, following on from the budget and last night's speech, and it's going to be interesting, I think, the next quarter to see what actually is the reaction.
Yeah.
OK, now hate crime is on the front page. I can't remember which paper now. I have to shuffle back through. We talked about it.
It's on the
Times. This is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is, we know that police should investigate hate crimes, but some of the details that are coming out is youngsters as young as 9 or 10 are being investigated by police and recorded as such when they've used what other people might call name-calling, like saying somebody smells a bit or whatever, which is not nice, nobody wants it. But is it a police matter, or is it something where you sit outside the head teacher's office?
I mean, I tend to, with stories like this, think that this must be overblown or there must be something sort of that we're missing of a detail. But it is just palpably ridiculous. And I think a lot of people will ask themselves, you know, there are lots of crimes that are going uninvestigated, unprosecuted, and for police to be spending time on something that seems... I don't want to minimise this, but trivial.
But supposedly, if a headmistress or headmaster calls the police and says, look, we've got a troublesome kid, then, you know, the police have got to then do something, I suppose. They can't just go, oh, well, we're not...
Well, you can get a burglary and call the police and they don't feel obliged to do something.
So they've got to go in and they've probably got to record it.
I don't understand that logic, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I look... Bullying in school, name-calling, you know, is not pleasant. I was, as a child, was on the receiving end of that. I know some of my children have been on receiving end of that. They're mixed race, and they have been. And what I would expect as a parent is if my child came home to me and said that they were receiving that I would go into the school, talk to the head, and I would want to see something done. I would want to see some engagement. I would want something to happen. I would want it recorded. But the idea of asking the police in to do that, and it might not be a deal that it's just the head teacher calling the police. It could be a parent bringing them in as well.
I mean,
but there has to be a better way to do it. And
to ration it, because I think what they're saying is that they're non-crime, because I imagine any kind of racist allegation would be a crime, wouldn't it? That would be a hate crime. Yeah. So this is non-crime incidents that are being recorded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think when I was an MP and we were looking at antisocial behaviour, one of the problems was that my constituents would say to me, we report things to the police, but they never recorded it. So they would say, no, we haven't heard anything from people. And I would find out that actually there was a whole load of antisocial behaviour going on in the community that the police weren't recording. So I think for those things, it's right. But it's what's proportionate as to what you are doing.
I've just got visions of a couple of coppers in a squad car. Where are we going, Gov?
Yeah.
Oh, we've done a St Thomas's primary.
It's
Johnny said that
ridiculous.
Freddie smells like a head. Get the lights on.
I know.
I know. The Sweeney,
It's not quite Bodie and
The fact that they can't walk there and they're going in a squad car is also a bit worrying as well, Adil. You know, not on the beat. You know, we've got, you know.
Look, I do think this is not just about this incident and the way that they record it in schools. I think that there is a difficulty with things like this where you get into the realm of censorship as well and what the police are investigating. There are unpleasant things that happen, but I don't think that it's always the job of the state. I think communities and groups should come together and be able to tackle that within themselves.
It's difficult. So the Prime Minister actually has said exactly your point, that, you know, fundamental right to free speech, but reactions and responses, or a spokesman for the Prime Minister, or a spokesperson, I suppose you should say, just in case I get recorded on an incident.
They're on their way.
They're on their way.
We've got them, Gav. We saw them. Good morning.
I don't know about you,
They're on their way.
I felt really harassed then.
A spokesperson Prime Minister said, of course, it must be proportionate, and that's the devil in the detail, isn't it? How to work that out.
They are reviewing the guidance.
Yeah,
anyway.
they're having a little look.
Shall we move on quickly?
Let's move on to air traffic meltdown. Do you remember this back in the summer? It was in August, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where, well, I remember lots of us got caught up in it, and it was at the most extraordinary moment when everything came to a standstill because of a computer glitch. And it now seems to be that the problem was the air traffic controller was working from home. So it seems to be
on their gaming system.
No, I mean, they went to logged on and there was like an IT... sorry, not air traffic control, the IT person that led to the glitch. So the IT person, there's a code they had to put in. I mean, this could so be me, by the way. I completely identify with this IT person. But anyway, the code they had to put in was very similar to another country's code.
Oh, gosh.
They then took ages to put their password in because it kept on getting rejected. That took an hour and a half, and then it took an hour for the authorities to then realise this was a problem and call them. So should we have people for that kind of crucial working from home?
No.
Well, so I was like, no.
Well, let's move on.
It was quite simple, wasn't it?
Everybody needs to make the choices that are right for their workforce, and there will be specific circumstances.
Yeah.
But there are certain jobs that just can't be done from home. And
I mean, it costs about £100 million.
There's also safety risk in this.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. Yeah. It's just, for me, it's really black and white in this issue. There are shades of grey with lots of different kinds of roles. You want to be flexible with people, but sometimes, actually, you're required to be there on the ground.
And you have to have backup, secondary backup for these sort of things. You know, I mean, there's loads of movies, aren't there, based on air traffic control rooms, and it does look like the most pressurised job in the world, actually, that. But you've got all these people as backup, hopefully, to keep the planes in the air and allow them to land. And I think, again, this is something where you think, you know, have the managers just lost the plot?
Well, also, I suppose working from home works beautifully because of computer systems and the chance to work everywhere for a lot of people. But when that goes wrong...
It's a sci-fi nightmare.
These systems, to restart the systems, you have to be on site to restart the
Reboot
systems.
it.
And that's why...
So that was a flaw.
So, Adele, they had to turn everything off and turn it on again.
This is, you know, August bank holiday weekend around that time. They know it's probably their busiest day of the year. You probably kind of should be thinking, I think let's bring the support guys in for this day.
Yeah.
You know, get him out of his pyjamas, get him in. I mean, it's incredible.
He wasn't in his pyjamas, was he?
Well, probably. I don't know.
That's not a scoop, is it?
That poor guy. Can you imagine his panic when he realised what he'd done and he was trying to get his password?
Can we move on to something quite serious, the situation in Gaza? Two big reports that came out yesterday, which a lot of people are sort of saying quite significant here. There's a UN Special Committee. Now, they have likened the Israel policy in Gaza to genocide. Really difficult language, which, of course, the US and Israel government have pushed back on. But I thought what was really significant was the Human Rights Watch. And Human Rights Watch are an independent group. They're not funded by any government. They're American-based. They're the same organisation that we rely on some of the information coming out of Iran and the bad treatment of women and children. They have said this is categorically forced displacement. And that they said up to 90% of people in Gaza have been displaced, and they've called it war crimes. This is getting pretty serious, yet don't seem to be getting a sort of sufficient response from our government or even Western governments, really, Sal.
Yes, I think it's insofar as Western governments can act, they have acted. The US deadline to Netanyahu to say that you need to provide aid by a certain point has not been met. And I think it sort of shows how limp we are in relation to Israel. I do think that regional actors that are closer to the situation also need to step in here. You know, what is Saudi Arabia doing? What is Qatar doing? What are those states that border Gaza? What are they doing in order to assist, apply pressure and relieve some of this strain and tension? So I don't think it's just about what Western governments can do. But yes, the situation is grave, and I think it's more serious because how is the rebuilding work going to start? We don't know how this ends at this point in time. We do want a settled peace, but where we have to then think about how Gaza is going to be rebuilt.
And supposedly, we will be picking up some of the bill for that. That's going to affect everyone around the world in terms of migration or rebuilding those countries. Do you get a sense that sort of we're at a weird moment where politics are out of sync with sort of public opinion? I mean, if you look at social media now, and from all kind of corners, people are posting stuff about Gaza all the time, people from all different backgrounds. And I feel that mood isn't quite being reflected in sort of with government leaders at the moment, Caroline.
I think it is the case, and Summer, you mentioned it, that the promises of aid getting through are just not being met. And how can they be met in a situation where there's pummelling of bombs going down all the time, aid workers have been killed, they can't get to people. To get aid to people, you need people in trucks. You need to be able to get people to get through the streets. And if it's just a pile of rubble, how can that happen? And, you know, just this last week, and conflict is awful in any situation, but just seeing the children that have lost limbs and been maimed and just the high numbers of women who are affected,
the UN,
is just awful.
The UN
awful.
said last week the highest age group of people who've died in that war are children between the age of 5 and 9 years old. I mean, that is catastrophic. And let's not forget amongst all this, we talk about the Palestinians, the hostages are in all of this somewhere, and we don't know where they are.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Netanyahu approach to this was about getting the hostages back, but we don't seem to be any nearer to achieving that at all. And let's see what happens. We've got a new president in America. Netanyahu is possibly happy about that change of direction. So a lot's going to pin on what happens next in America as well.
Okay. We all know, and you two especially know, how lively things can get in our parliament and on those green benches when people object to what others are saying. But these were the scenes in New Zealand. Now, just before we play it, the issue in question was rights, land rights, and a change is being proposed that where legally Maori land rights had been preferred, although the Maoris didn't necessarily feel that that was what was the reality. Now this has been changed to include all New Zealanders. But it got dramatic. Have a look at this. Quite hard to go order over the top of that, isn't it? The haka, of course, and a very effective demonstration.
I absolutely love the haka. You see it at the beginning of the rugby matches, and it's just incredible.
Very powerful and dominating, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I mean, maybe we need that in British government.
I quite like it in a political context. I mean, all we get is
maybe
kind
not
of
every
like
day.
Lib Dem glitter cannons at your election time. So.
I think it has its time and a place, and it's obviously a really important time in terms of you know, what's happening in New Zealand. We see similar stuff in Australia with
what is our equivalent of the haka? It'd be Morris dancing. It couldn't quite work, would it?
You wouldn't be allowed. You'd grab the mace and do the sticks. In fact, don't forget, Michael Heseltine once actually grabbed the mace.
Did he?
Some years ago, and there were loads of cartoons with him dressed as Tarzan.
Before there was a
that's
camera,
right.
the cameras in the chamber. He took the mace, which has got to be in place for the debate, and sort of swung it round his head, and that's why his nickname was Tarzan.
Yeah.
Oh, of course! It's all coming back to...
So we now that we've got the cameras in...
So nobody likes to misbehave.
A
bit of that passion for something you believe in, is that what we're missing here?
So I think it's interesting because it's an Indigenous conversation about Indigenous land rights, and I think it was almost appropriate to have that sort of protest there because it, you know, really signified the differences. I think orderly debate in whatever way you have it, is something that I would always prefer.
Yeah, and you can't have MPs grandstanding all the time to everything, dare I say it. You know, there's enough of that goes on, isn't there, really?
Well,
Morris dancing.
Morris dancing. Or maybe, you know...
Is that a protest movement, do you think? Morris dancing in the chamber?
It'd be very British, wouldn't it? Should we talk about text messages?
Yes, so I don't know. I mean, most of my kids don't even text anymore. It's all various social...
You don't text?
I do.
I send you a message. It takes about 3 weeks to get one back. Oh, how are you too, Adel? Are you all right?
Hashtag awkward. But apparently, what are we doing? I'm just busy, Adel. You know I love you. Charlotte, do you get messages
No, she's straight back to me.
Yeah, she replies.
Really?
It's all very awkward.
God, he's going to report
very,
you for a
very
hate
awkward.
crime
Exactly.
But basically, there's
Governor.
you know how we were supposed to use abbreviations, and older people, when they got into texting, like my dad would always say, yours faithfully, Dad, you know, which you didn't need to at the end of it. It's flipped now, and apparently it's not a good thing to say LOL or abbreviate, because it looks a bit inauthentic.
Yeah, and I always use the wrong ones anyway, and my kids say, oh, Mum, for God's sake, you're 10 years behind or something. I find I'm so short-sighted and sort of varifocals and everything that I end up abbreviating in a way that I didn't want to. So the spelling is just pretty awful on things. Like, I have to go back and put in things. Sorry, I meant this sort of thing. The predictive texting.
Guys, you need to get down with the kids. It's all about the emoji reaction.
Well, Stanford University that did this study actually said it's a kind of in a business world as well. It just feels inauthentic. That. So, but you do an emoji, do you? What's your favourite emoji?
Oh, love heart.
Oh, why not? Why not? We should ask you, actually, is there an abbreviation
annoying
that you get on a text that makes you think, oh, so annoying, why do people do that? That's not the way they speak in real life.
The guys at Stanford University have said it's less sincere when you do things like that. So send us examples of text messages.
Sincerely. Thank you.
Thank you.